So the next thing that I'm going to show you is having your horse get a good bend through their whole body on the ground. A lot of horses, their trouble with bending is in their body. So again, if your horse is really struggling with this, you probably will need to have some sort of bodywork therapy, chiropractor, massage, craniosacral, any of those sorts of things. Work on your horse and get them loosened up. But a lot of times too, they can just be kind of stiff. And so doing this on the ground without the weight of a saddle and the weight of a rider and getting a real limber and supple and loosened up on the ground is going to help you a lot when you go to get on. Okay? First, like I showed you with your disengagement, your horse needs to be light, moving their head around to the side from the halter. If you can't, at a stop, get your horse to tip its nose, then don't attempt this at a walk. Once your horse is light though, like you saw, where I can grab onto the top or the side of her halter and she just brings her head around with me real easy, then you can go ahead and try this at a walk. Now, I'm going to have my lead rope and my whip in my right hand in this case. I'm on her left side. My left hand is going to be on the halter. My right hand is going to hold the whip and lead rope. Now, what I do want to point out to you is how I use the whip in this instance. I'm going to actually use the handle of the whip in the same way that I would use my leg when I'm riding. And so right here, kind of just behind the girth, I'm going to use just this nice smooth handle part, and I'm just going to use it for a little bit of pressure to get her to bend through a rib cage is all, okay? So I'll go ahead and show you. I'm going to ask her to walk first, and we're going to walk in a little circle right here. And I'm going to ask her head, and then see she's got a lovely bend. I haven't had to touch her with the whip at all. But you see how it's not just her head? See how she's bent through her whole body? Okay? And the other thing is that she's not running into me with her shoulder either. If your horse, which is something that horses that aren't very balanced, in order to try to get out of doing the bend correctly, they'll tip their nose and then they'll fall on that inside shoulder. So if your horse is running into you with this shoulder right here, then you know that's the problem. Your horse isn't very balanced. I also, again, I'm going to use this flat handle of the whip, and I would move it to the shoulder instead, okay? You do need to defend yourself a little bit. It's not worth getting stepped on and having your foot broke or getting pushed over or anything like that. And it's going to be good for your horse in the long run. It may tick them off a little bit in the beginning because, you know, they're trying to take the easy way out or they don't know any better. And, you know, it seems very easy to just fall on that shoulder. In the long run, though, it's going to be so much better for your horse. They're going to be better balanced if you teach them to bend without falling on that shoulder. So again, I'm going to ask her to walk. And if your horse falls on the shoulder, I'll turn her around here and show you. And as I turn her around, you can go ahead and zoom in on my hand. If your horse falls in on the shoulder and pushes on you, I would use my whip right here and move her off. Okay? If she's not falling on that shoulder and I just need more bend, I'm going to use it back here where my leg would go. So that way when I ride, it's going to translate to where my leg is. So now I'm going to go ahead to the other side here. Same thing again, switching hands. Left hand now has my rope and whip, and my right hand is going to hold on to her halter. Like I've said with everything else, your horse will be different to either side. They're going to have an easier side and a harder side. What I would do with this bending, because it is a suppling exercise, I would go twice as much to the hard side as I do to the easy side. Okay? Just until the horse starts to balance out. Once they balance out, you can do it evenly, but I would emphasize more on your horse's hard side. A lot of times as people, we also like to take the easy way, and we like to practice it more to the easy side for our own benefit. But for your horse's body to help balance them out, you're going to be better off if you go more to the horse's difficult side. So now we'll see how she is on this side. I'm going to ask her to walk first. Tip her nose around. Good girl. And again, I want to point out to you, see how the bend is through her body? She's not just tipping her nose. Good. Very nice. So that's something that I would do a lot of if you have a horse that's really stiff or has trouble bending to one side when you're riding or trouble in their circles or anything like that. I would do a lot of this on the ground until you get really good balance. You know, your horse can circle around you without falling on that shoulder or stepping on you, and stays nice and relaxed through it. If you have a horse that you have trouble using the whip with, some are a little bit flighty and are afraid of the whip and that sort of stuff, you do want to work on that and kind of get them over it. But if you're in the process of working on that and you feel like, I want to do this exercise, but I don't think that it's a good idea to try it with the whip. The whip makes my horse nervous, and I'd like them to relax through this. If you have a horse that's pretty sensitive, you can oftentimes use your hand as well, okay? If you have a horse that's a little bit more dull, then you may want to use the whip handle. But a sensitive horse, you could also use your hand. Or for some people, it's just the coordination. They have trouble, being able to use the whip and hold the head and walk with them at the same time. So, just play with it. I prefer to use the whip. I find it easier. I find that the horses understand it better. You don't have to use it as much. But if you're having trouble with it, feel free to play with using your hands. But I would use some pressure in the beginning when you're teaching it. I would definitely, whether you use your whip or your hand, make sure that you do put some pressure, because you want your horse to translate that to when you get on them, when that inside leg comes on right about at the girth, right just behind it. You want your horse to think, oh, that's kind of like the pressure here when I had to move my rib cage out and bend. So don't skip that step, okay? Don't just go from the head. If you've practiced it quite a bit and your horse is doing it very nicely and bending through their whole body, rib cage and everything, then you don't need to put pressure. That's fine, okay? But when you're teaching it, I would really recommend, so right here, she's got a lovely bend through a rib cage. So right there, straighten down a little bit. There you go. So, once you have taught it, you don't need to necessarily. But when you are first in teaching it or getting your horse to hold the position, I would use that little bit of pressure there, so it's going to be easier for you when you're riding. All right, so now that I've got him, he releases the halter pressure. We've tipped his head around for the disengagement, and we had him lowering to pull pressure. Now we're going to go ahead and have him bending. Again, we're going to do this at a walk. Good boy. Now he's kind of swinging out a little bit. If you couldn't tell right there, he was really swinging his butt out, so I just keep walking with him. And just keep walking with him in a circle. And he's not falling on his shoulder into me. He's actually falling the opposite way. And he's liking to play with his head a lot. So I'm just going to wait for him a little bit. Good. There we go. Still waiting for him. Good. And playing with his head still. So see, it's not going to look quite so nice at the beginning. You'll have to play with it. Oh, still play with it. And see how I kind of have a little bit of a stiff arm. Even when he tosses his head, he's not going to get away from me that easy. And I'm not being too too much like that. I'm just going to hold steady. There he goes. Good. Alright, so even though that wasn't quite perfect, it was quite a bit better. He started to relax and was bending towards me, okay? It wasn't quite entirely through his body to the extent that I would like it to be, but it was much better. It was definitely, he was moving his rib cage out and was starting to get the correct bend, okay? What you saw in the beginning where he was really swinging his hind end out, that's not ideal. You really want your horse to be on two straight tracks, walking in a circle, not swinging his hind out. Okay, so let's try the other side. Maybe easier, maybe harder. Well, you'll have to test with your horse and see what's easier or more difficult on either side. This side, walking first. And see, he likes to, toss his head and get distracted and goof off and all this sort of stuff. And I'm just going to stay steady. Oh, good boy. Much better on this side. Good boy. Good. There you go. Good. Alright, so that was a little bit better. This side wasn't nearly as difficult for him as the last side. Good boy. But he still was kind of tossing his head a little bit, but he wasn't swinging his hind out. So I just held until he started to relax his head where he could bend comfortably, with me holding the pressure there without him wanting to toss his head or turn it the other direction. Alright, so bending. I've got my left hand on her halter and my right hand, I've got the flat end of the whip. Or I'm gonna hold my whip, but with her, because she is so sensitive to pressure, I'm gonna just use my hand, okay? So I'm gonna hold my whip if I need it, but I'm pretty much just gonna use my hand right about at the girth. I'm gonna ask her to walk with me. And she has a starting to relax. Not quite the bend I'm looking for yet, but relaxing. Oh, fell on her shoulder a little bit, a little more pressure. Good. There she goes, good girl. So I'm gonna go ahead and release on that one. That was an improvement for her. And the main thing, like I said, that I'm waiting for is for her to relax into it. So she's a little tense at first. Didn't know what I was asking for. She hasn't done a whole lot of stuff in hand where we're walking together like that. She's a little bit unsure of it, a little tense through her neck. But once she started to relax and started to kind of bend her head around, that's when I gave to her. It's not a perfect bend yet, but the main thing, like I said, with this exercise is that you get a nice relaxed bend is going to be the important part. I'll try to the other side. Walking. Good. So this side's a little easier for her. Good. Good job. So you can see with her, the bend was much easier, but she was kind of falling out, kind of pushing the circle bigger. And so what I would do with her is over the next couple days just work on walking in a circle together and still working on bending, but just not let her pull me out onto a larger circle. Decide, even if you need to set up some sort of barrier poles or whatever, and you can have cones, to decide on the size of a circle and stay on it and not let your horse pull you out any bigger than what you want to be. And that's just a balance issue. So when I was on this side, so I can tell just from doing that, I can tell that she overweights her left front. Okay, because when I was on this side, asking her to bend, she kind of fell on her shoulder a little bit, not too bad. And when I put some pressure on and corrected her, she picked it up right away. So she's not too bad unbalanced, but she prefers to put her weight on this front. Because then when I went on the other side, she was leaning out. She was still leaning on this left one. So on her left, she's leaning in, and on the right, she's leaning out. And so I know that she's really putting weight on this left front leg. And so that's just something that you're aware of in your straightness training and in your in-hand work with your horse. You're aware of which side they're better to or not, and then you just work on it to balance them out where they can have a nice balanced circle on both sides.